On May 22nd, 2025, by the slimmest of margins, just one vote, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a sweeping legislative package nicknamed the One Big Beautiful Bill, backed strongly by President Donald Trump. This bill is already being called the most aggressive domestic policy overhaul since the early days of Reagan, or even FDR, depending on who you ask. But what's actually inside this bill? What does it mean for everyday Americans? And here's the kicker: how might the Founding Fathers have reacted to it? Just a quick note that this is all very fresh news, and I'm one person, but I did my best to ensure accuracy. If you do find any errors, please feel free to correct them in the comments. All right, let's start with the basics. Officially titled One Big Beautiful Bill Act, this legislation aims to deliver on many of President Trump's campaign promises. It's massive, combining tax cuts, healthcare reforms, immigration policies, gun legislation, and more into one omnibus package. The vote passed 215 to 214 with nearly every Democrat and a handful of moderate Republicans voting against it. Now it's on to the Senate. But the real story is what's actually inside this bill and why it matters so much. The biggest headline is tax reform. The bill permanently extends the 2017 Trump-era tax cuts for individuals. Those cuts were originally set to expire in 2025. Now they're locked in. Individual tax cuts made permanent. SALT cap raised to $40,000 for incomes less than $500,000. Taxes eliminated on tips, overtime pay, and car loan interest. So one of the flashier new provisions is a MAGA Savings account. These are $1,000 per child annual accounts that parents can contribute to, with potential tax advantages and growth incentives. Think of them as a blend between an HSA and a 529 college fund, just with political branding baked in. So, how would the Founding Fathers see these changes? Let's pull Alexander Hamilton out of the past for a moment. Hamilton, the architect of early American finance, might have liked the pro-growth aspects. He believed in a strong federal government that supported commerce, but he would have been skeptical about the ballooning debt projections. Experts estimate this bill could add $3.8 trillion to the national debt over 10 years. Cheers. But in a letter in 1790, Alexander Hamilton said, "A national debt, if it is not excessive, will be to us a national blessing." But excessive debt? That Hamilton would have warned against. Next up, healthcare and social safety nets. The bill introduces sweeping changes to Medicaid. Starting in 2026, able-bodied adults receiving Medicaid will be required to work, volunteer, or enroll in job training to remain eligible. So Medicaid work requirements begin in 2026, higher premiums for those above the poverty line, and federal funds prohibited for gender-affirming care and abortion providers. Critics say this is moral overreach, cutting off care to marginalized communities. Supporters argue it incentivizes self-reliance. Now let's bring in Thomas Jefferson, the man who championed the small farmer and the idea of a limited federal government. Jefferson might have approved of trimming federal programs in favor of local control, but he also believed deeply in compassion and civic responsibility. Restricting healthcare access based on identity or poverty, that might have troubled him. Thomas Jefferson said, "The care of human life and happiness, and not their destruction, is the first and only object of good government." Perhaps the boldest section of the bill deals with immigration. Over $160 billion is earmarked for DHS to expand border enforcement. This includes $70 billion for border walls, drones, agents, and AI surveillance. In total, it's the largest border security investment in U.S. history. So $160 billion to DHS through 2029, $70 billion for physical border barriers, and an expansion of detention centers and surveillance. This is Trump's wall on steroids. So what might George Washington or Benjamin Franklin think of this? Washington worried about foreign influence and saw national defense as essential. He may have supported a strong border, but Franklin, an immigrant's best friend, might have seen this as an overreaction. Ben Franklin said, "When men differ in opinion, both sides ought equally to have the advantage of being heard by the public." All right, let's pivot to guns. One of the more controversial provisions is the removal of firearm suppressors, aka silencers, from the National Firearms Act. This means background checks and tax stamps are no longer required to buy them. Supporters say it's a win for hunters and gun owners. Critics say it's dangerous. The NRA has already dubbed this a Second Amendment victory. James Madison, author of the Second Amendment, did believe in armed citizenry, but he also stressed the balance between liberty and public safety. James Madison said, "Liberty may be endangered by the abuses of liberty as well as the abuses of power." Now here's where things get even more controversial. Tucked inside this bill is a provision that some legal scholars argue could undermine the authority of the U.S. Supreme Court. Critics say it's a vague attempt to weaken judicial review and concentrate more power in the executive and legislative branches. So legal scholars are raising alarms about separation of powers. There's this provision that could limit SCOTUS's review on certain executive actions. And this could be one of the biggest constitutional flashpoints in years. To every one of the Constitution's framers, the separation of powers was sacred. Madison called it essential to prevent tyranny. Hamilton, Adams, even Jefferson, they all agreed that no branch of government should dominate the others. James Madison, in Federalist number 47, said, "The accumulation of all powers in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny." Last but not least, energy. The bill reduces federal support for new green energy projects, rolling back incentives for solar and wind. However, it maintains funding for nuclear energy and clean coal research. So wind and solar tax breaks curtailed. Nuclear and fossil energy research retained. Critics say it's a step backward for climate goals. While this aligns with Trump's energy independence agenda, it's already facing pushback from environmentalists and European allies. So where does all this leave us? The One Big Beautiful Bill is a reflection of the deep divide in American politics. To some, it's a bold step forward, restoring sovereignty, boosting the economy, and protecting traditional values. To others, it's a dangerous concentration of power and a rollback of hard-won rights. And if the Founding Fathers could weigh in, they'd probably argue amongst themselves. But on one thing, they'd agree. Every generation must ask whether its government still protects liberty, promotes justice, and serves the public good. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share it wherever you share these things, and let me know in the comments, which part of the bill do you think the Founding Fathers would have supported or opposed? And as always, stay thoughtful, stay curious, and stay free.